Millfield, Oregon, 1955. A small town where dreams were simple and hopes were genuine, where a 19-year-old young woman named Margaret O'Brien arrived by train, carrying only a worn leather suitcase and the address of a boarding house on Main Street. Margaret had left Portland behind, not for adventure but out of necessity. Her parents' death in a car accident had left only debts and painful memories. Millfield represented a fresh start, a chance to build something new away from the shadows of the past. She didn't know she was about to find not just a new life, but also the people who would become her chosen family. People who would be by her side in the most important and most painful moments of her existence. This is the third story of Millfield, the story of Margaret Collins, before being a mother, before tragedy, before separation. The story of a young woman who learned that home is not a place, but the people we choose to love. May 1955. The train stopped at Millfield's small station at 2:37 p.m., and Margaret O'Brien stepped off with her heart tight with uncertainty. The town was even smaller than she had imagined. A main street, a few shops, houses scattered among century-old oak trees. Miller's boarding house was 3 blocks from the station. Mrs. Eleanor Miller, a 58-year-old widow with grey hair, always pulled back in a bun, rented rooms to respectable young ladies for $12 a month, breakfast included. "You have the look of someone running from something," Mrs. Miller said, while showing the small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Not that it's any of my business. Everyone who comes to Millfield is running from something." Margaret held back tears. "I'm not running, I'm starting over. It's the same thing, dear. The difference is just in how you look forward." The job came 3 days later. Thompson's General Store, the town's department store, needed someone to organize inventory and serve customers. Mr. Harold Thompson, a gentle 50-year-old man, hired Margaret on the spot. "Do you have education?" he asked. "I finished high school in Portland and I can do math." "That's already more than most around here. The job is yours." Margaret discovered she had a knack for sales. She listened to people, really listened, when they entered the store. Mrs. Patterson needed arthritis medicine. Margaret knew exactly where to find it. Young Bobby Henderson wanted to impress a girl at the school dance. Margaret helped him choose the perfect tie. In 6 months, she had become not just an employee, but part of the community. People came to Thompson's not just to buy, but to talk to that sweet girl from Portland who really cares. And it was on one of those December afternoons in 1955, when Margaret was organizing Christmas decorations, that Joyce Patterson entered the store for the first time. Joyce was only 2 years older than Margaret, but carried a maturity that only comes from having seen the world beyond Millfield. She had recently returned from Portland, where she had worked as a nurse during the Korean War, caring for wounded soldiers arriving from field hospitals. "I need something special for my mother's Christmas," Joyce said, looking at the displayed items. "She spent the whole year telling me I should have stayed in Portland, that Millfield is too small for someone with my ambitions." Margaret smiled. "And do you think she's right? I think home is where you can make a difference, and I prefer to save one life here in Millfield than be just another anonymous nurse in a big city." It was the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives forever. '56 was the year Margaret truly took root in Millfield. She had moved from the boarding house to a small house on Elm Street, 2 porches, a garden she learned to cultivate, and a kitchen where she spent Sundays making pies to take to Joyce. Joyce lived in the house next door. It wasn't a coincidence. When Margaret mentioned she wanted her own house, Joyce immediately spoke to Mrs. Henderson, who owned the neighboring property. "Margaret is exactly the kind of person we want on this street," Joyce had said. The two became inseparable. Saturday mornings were for cleaning houses and innocent gossip about who was dating whom in town. Sunday afternoons were for walks in the park or picnics near Cascade River, where they planned their futures. "I want to get married someday," Margaret confessed on one of those afternoons, watching families playing near the water. "I want to have children who grow up here, who have roots I never had." "And you will," Joyce replied with conviction. "I can feel these things." "You were made to be a mother, Margaret." Work at Thompson's flourished, Margaret had become practically the store manager, and Mr. Thompson talked about making her a partner when he retired. She had found not just a job, but a calling, caring for people, anticipating their needs, making them feel special. And it was on a March morning in 1957 that Thomas Collins entered Thompson's looking for work gloves. Thomas was different from the other young men in Millfield. At 22, he worked in the Cooper Creek mines, but his eyes shone with bigger dreams. He talked about buying a farm, raising cattle, building something lasting. "You don't look like a miner," Margaret said while showing the available gloves. "That's because I don't intend to be a miner forever," Thomas replied, smiling. "I'm saving to buy a piece of land. My grandmother always said the land doesn't lie. You plant with care, it returns double." The courtship began slowly. Thomas appeared at the store every Friday, always with an excuse to buy something small: nails he didn't need, soap he already had at home, candy to take to work colleagues. Margaret pretended not to notice, but always reserved a few minutes to talk. Joyce watched everything with amused approval. "That boy is going to exhaust Thompson's inventory just for an excuse to talk to you," she teased. "He's sweet," Margaret replied, blushing. "He's in love. And so are you." The first official date was in May 1957. Thomas took Margaret for a picnic near the old stone bridge over Cascade River. He had prepared ham sandwiches, homemade lemonade, and even brought a plaid blanket borrowed from his mother. "Margaret," he said while watching the river flow, "I know you came from a big city, that maybe Millfield seems too small for someone like you." "Thomas," she interrupted gently, "I didn't come to Millfield by accident. I came because I was looking for exactly this, a place where I can be myself, where people care about each other, a place where I can build roots. And would you like to build those roots with me?" Margaret took his hand. "I would love to. If you're enjoying this video, please click the like button so YouTube can share it with more people. And if you enjoy this type of video, please subscribe to our channel." The wedding of Margaret O'Brien and Thomas Collins took place in September 1957 at Millfield's small Methodist church. It was a simple ceremony. Margaret wore her mother's dress, which Joyce had helped alter, and Thomas borrowed his father's suit. Joyce was the maid of honor, of course. She had organized everything, from church decorations to the party in the community hall. "Every wedding needs someone who worries about details," she said, "and you two are too busy being happy to think about it." The honeymoon was a weekend in a borrowed cabin in the mountains. Thomas had saved for months to pay for 2 nights away from town. They spent the days hiking trails, planning the future, dreaming about the farm they would buy and the children they would have. "How many children do you want?" Margaret asked, one morning, while they prepared coffee over an improvised fire. "However many God gives us," Thomas replied, hugging her from behind. "A house full of laughter and mess. I always wanted a big family. I grew up alone and always wondered what it would be like to have siblings." The first 2 years of marriage were of quiet happiness. Margaret continued working at Thompson's, now as junior partner, and Thomas in the mines, religiously saving to realize their farm dream. They had rented a small house on Oak Street, with 2 bedrooms and a garden where Margaret planted vegetables and flowers. Joyce visited almost every day. She had become not just the best friend, but part of the family. She dined with them on Sundays, helped Margaret with household chores when Thomas worked double shifts, and became both their confidant. But as months passed, Margaret began to worry. She and Thomas desperately wanted children, but pregnancy didn't come. Month after month, hope would grow and then dissolve. "Maybe I can't have children," Margaret confessed to Joyce on a winter afternoon in 1959, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe Thomas married the wrong person." "Margaret Collins, don't say such." "Nonsense," Joyce replied firmly, sitting beside her friend on the sofa. "You're going to be a mother. I know it in the depths of my heart. Sometimes God makes us wait because He's preparing something special. And if it never happens, then you and Thomas will find other ways to build your family. But I'm certain, absolutely certain, that won't be necessary." March 1960. Margaret had been late for 2 weeks but didn't allow herself to hope. She had been through this before. expectations that turned into disappointments. It was Joyce who insisted she see Dr. Morrison. "Margaret, you're different," Joyce said one morning, watching her friend push breakfast around her plate. "Paler, more tired. And when was the last time you ate bacon without nausea?" Dr. Helena Morrison's office was on the second floor of the bank building. Margaret climbed the stairs with her heart racing, Thomas holding her hand, Joyce waiting in the reception room. The examination lasted only 15 minutes, but to Margaret it seemed like hours. "Mrs. Collins," Dr. Morrison finally said, "I have good news. You're pregnant." "From what I can calculate, about 8 weeks along." Margaret broke down in tears. Thomas hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. In the waiting room, Joyce heard the cries of joy and began crying too. 3 years, Margaret whispered through tears. 3 years waiting for this moment. And it was worth every day of waiting, Thomas replied, kissing her forehead. The following months were a mixture of pure joy and natural anxiety. Margaret had never been so happy, but had also never felt so scared. What if something went wrong? What if she lost the baby? Joyce became her anchor. As a nurse, she knew exactly what was normal and what should be concerning. She accompanied Margaret to all appointments, took notes on medical instructions, and calmed her fears with knowledge and care. "This baby will be born strong and healthy," Joyce always repeated. "I can feel it. He's growing perfectly." But as the pregnancy progressed, Margaret noticed her belly was growing more than normal. Dr. Morrison had also commented on the unusual size of the uterus. "Is it possible they're twins?" Margaret asked, during a July appointment. "It's possible," Dr. Morrison replied cautiously. "Your uterus is definitely larger than expected for a single pregnancy. But without a way to see inside, we'll only know for sure at delivery." Thomas was radiant with the possibility. "Twins? Can you imagine, Margaret? 2 babies at once?" Margaret smiled, but deep in her heart felt a pang of concern. Something told her the surprise would be even bigger than they imagined. August 1960. Margaret was in her 8th month of pregnancy when she received the news that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning when Joyce appeared at the door, her face pale and eyes red from crying. "Margaret, sit down, please." "What happened, Joyce?" "You're scaring me." "There was an accident at the mine, a collapse." Margaret felt the world spin around her. "Thomas," Joyce just shook her head, unable to speak the words. What followed was a blur of pain, tears, and a sense of unreality. Margaret refused to believe that Thomas wouldn't come home, that he wouldn't meet the baby or babies. They had waited for so long. Joyce never left her friend's side. She organized the funeral, dealt with bureaucracy, took care of Margaret when she couldn't even get out of bed. She temporarily moved into Margaret's house, sleeping on the sofa to always be nearby. "I don't know how I'm going to raise this child." "Alone," Margaret confessed one night 2 weeks after the funeral, her hands on her belly that continued growing. "You're not going to raise it alone," Joyce replied firmly. "I'll be here always. This child will grow up knowing they have 2 mothers, one who carried them and another who chose to love them unconditionally." "What if I don't know how to be a good mother?" "Margaret, you spent years taking care of everyone in this town. You anticipate needs, offer comfort, make people feel special. You're already a mother to half of Millfield. Now you'll just do it for someone who is your own blood." The last 2 months of pregnancy passed in a fog of grief and expectation. Margaret knew Thomas would never hold his child in his arms, would never see them take their first steps, would never teach them to fish in Cascade River as they had planned. But she also knew she carried within her the only part of Thomas that remained in the world, and that gave her strength to continue. "However many babies there are," she whispered to her belly one September night, "you'll know your father through the stories I'll tell. You'll know he loved you before you even existed." October 1960. Margaret Collins was ready to give birth, but didn't yet know that her life was about to change in ways her most fertile imagination couldn't predict. She had built a life in Millfield, found love, lost love, but gained a friendship that would prove stronger than any adversity. Joyce Patterson had become more than a friend. She was sister, confidant, and the person who would be by her side in the most important and most painful moment of her life. Margaret didn't know she was carrying 3 babies. She didn't know that silent contamination was spreading through the town's water. She didn't know that the accident that had taken Thomas would create the circumstances that would separate her family. But she knew she wasn't alone. And sometimes, when destiny tests our strength to the limit, that's all we need to survive. This was the 3rd story of Millfield, the story of Margaret Collins, a young woman who came looking for a fresh start and found much more than she expected. Love, loss, true friendship, and the strength to face any storm when we have someone by our side. A mother's journey was just beginning. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel and share our video to help us spread our stories.